What if everything you were told about why America backs Israel was just the surface layer? And underneath it, there's a far colder, far more ruthless calculation that has nothing to do with shared values, religious solidarity, or even the much discussed Jewish lobby. What if the real story is about power, geography, technology, and who controls the nervous system of the entire Middle East? Because right now, in April 2026, with the Strait of Hormuz under siege, oil markets in chaos, and American THAAD missile batteries quietly removed from Abu Dhabi and repositioned over Tel Aviv, you are watching the live unfolding of a truth that Washington has never spoken out loud, that in the grand American strategic chess game, Israel's position in the Gulf region is worth more than every barrel of crude oil sitting beneath the Arabian sands, not symbolically, structurally, operationally. The Gulf Arab states pledged over $3 trillion in investment to the United States during Trump's 2025 tour of Riyadh, and yet Washington still pulled air defense systems away from Saudi Arabia to protect Israel. A Saudi official, in one of the most stunning public statements in recent memory, said openly, "The US abandoned us and redirected its air defense to protect Israel." That sentence alone should stop every American in their tracks and force them to ask the question this video is going to answer: why? The answer is going to take you somewhere most American media will never go. So stay with me, because this is where the real world actually operates. Let's start from the beginning, and I mean the actual beginning. Not the diplomatic language, not the press releases, not the congressional speeches about shared democratic values. Let's start from the map, because geography, as any serious student of power knows, is destiny. Israel sits on the Mediterranean, bordering Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, and sits within striking distance of Iran, occupying what analysts call a geopolitical sweet spot for surveillance, rapid deployment, and power projection. Think about what that means in practical terms. You are looking at a piece of land that functions like an aircraft carrier that never sinks, never needs refueling, and is permanently anchored at the intersection of three continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. No oil field gives you that. No mineral deposit gives you that. An oil well gives you a commodity. Israel's geography gives Washington a command and control node at the center of the world's most contested real estate. And that's before we even get to what Israel does with that geography. US-Israeli security cooperation dates back to the Cold War, when Israel came to be seen in Washington as a bulwark against Soviet influence and a counter to Arab nationalism. Israel has prevented the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction by thwarting Iraq and Syria's nuclear programs. The two countries share intelligence on terrorism, nuclear proliferation, and Middle Eastern politics. And Israel's military experiences have shaped the United States' approach to counterterrorism and homeland security. Now read that sentence again slowly. Iraq's nuclear program, dismantled by Israel. Syria's nuclear program, dismantled by Israel. Iran's nuclear ambitions, constrained, degraded, and now targeted in the most dramatic escalation the region has seen in modern history. Washington did not have to spend a single American life on most of those operations. Israel did the work, the dirty work, the work that keeps American hands technically clean while American strategic interests get protected. That is not a coincidence. That is the arrangement. Now contrast that with what oil gives you. Oil gives you leverage over energy markets, but that leverage is shrinking. The Trump administration views Saudi capital as essential to reshoring semiconductor manufacturing and reducing exposure to Chinese supply chains, seeks predictability in how Saudi Arabia engages in pricing Saudi oil, and relies on Saudi defense procurement to sustain elements of the US industrial base. Notice what that list actually is. Saudi Arabia's value to Washington is increasingly transactional, increasingly economic, increasingly about chips and dollars and supply chains, not about irreplaceable military function. Washington needs Saudi money. Washington needs Israeli capability. And in the hierarchy of power, capability always trumps money, because money can be found elsewhere. Capability, the kind of real-time, battle-tested, intelligence-saturated military capability that Israel brings to the table, cannot be bought or replicated in a generation. Here is where it gets even more interesting, and where the deeper structure of American strategy in the Middle East reveals itself. Spearheaded by Israeli initiative and broadly endorsed by Washington, a new tri-pillar regional order is emerging, centered around Israel, Turkey, and the Gulf states. Israel leads in military capacity and regional initiative, driven by a willingness to act decisively and unilaterally to prevent the emergence of threats. Its dominant role has not emerged from US delegation, but from bold actions against both state and non-state actors: Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, the Assad regime, and the Houthis. This makes Israel indispensable. Indispensable. That word is doing enormous work in that sentence. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, they are commercially ambitious but militarily constrained. They buy American weapons. They host American bases. They pump American-priced oil. But when an actual threat emerged from Iran in April 2024 and more than 300 missiles and drones were fired toward Israel, it was the Gulf states that quietly supplied radar tracking and early warning data, coordinating in the shadow of Israeli air defense systems. They were useful to the architecture, but the architecture itself was Israeli and American. And this is precisely the dynamic that Washington has been quietly engineering since at least the Abraham Accords in 2020. The entire logic of the Accords, which the mainstream American press lazily described as a peace deal, was not about peace at all. It was about integration. It was about pulling the Gulf states into an orbit where Israel becomes the security anchor, the technological spine, the military nervous system of a new regional order. The US has encouraged regional energy cooperation that advances projects through the Abraham Accords framework, including investing in natural gas, electricity, and other infrastructure with Israel and partner nations, and has supported efforts to connect energy infrastructure, trade, and financing opportunities among Israel, Bahrain, the UAE, and future Accords countries in the Gulf. Read between those lines, Washington is not just brokering peace. Washington is wiring the Gulf into an Israeli-anchored circuit board of economic and security interdependence. Once that wiring is complete, once trade routes, energy corridors, intelligence networks, and military coordination channels all run through Israel, then Israel's position in the region becomes structurally irreplaceable, not just for itself, but for American power projection across the entire hemisphere. Now let's talk about technology, because this is the dimension that most people completely miss when they try to understand why America values Israel above the oil states. We are living in a moment of civilizational transition, where the currency of global power is shifting from hydrocarbons to semiconductors, from barrels of crude to petabytes of data. And in that transition, Israel holds cards that Saudi Arabia and the UAE are only beginning to understand they need. In the security sphere, sovereign AI infrastructure will enable Gulf states to develop advanced military and intelligence capabilities previously exclusive to Israel in the region. Previously exclusive to Israel, that phrase is the key. For decades, Israel has been the only state in the Middle East with the kind of signals, intelligence infrastructure, cyber warfare capabilities, surveillance technology, and battlefield artificial intelligence that defines modern military power. Unit 8200, Israel's intelligence core, has produced more cybersecurity startups per capita than any comparable institution in the world. The technology flowing out of the Israeli defense establishment into Silicon Valley and into American national security systems is not marginal. It is foundational to how America operates its intelligence apparatus globally. At the end of 2025, the United States approved, for the first time, the export of the most advanced AI chips produced by NVIDIA to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, in an initial quantity of tens of thousands of chips for each country. And that approval came with strict conditions. As a condition for approval of the sale of NVIDIA's most advanced Blackwell chips, Saudi Arabia and the UAE were required to physically and systematically separate Blackwell-based infrastructure from any systems using Huawei technology. Washington gave the Gulf states advanced chips the moment it was confident they were decoupling from Chinese technology. That is not generosity. That is strategic incorporation. Washington is selectively upgrading the Gulf's technological infrastructure to bring it closer into alignment with an American-Israeli technology ecosystem. The Gulf states are being invited into the club, but the club's rules are written in Tel Aviv and Washington. And let's be brutally honest about what the current war, this staggering escalation between the US-Israel axis and Iran that began in earnest in 2025 and accelerated catastrophically in early 2026, has revealed about the real hierarchy of American priorities in the region. By August 2025, the US had redeployed a THAAD battery previously stationed in Abu Dhabi to Israel to support their missile shield against Iranian threats. This relocation represented a major strategic shift, leading to complaints from regional allies, such as Saudi Arabia, that the US was prioritizing Israeli security over Gulf state defenses. In July 2025, The US asked Saudi Arabia to send its missile interceptors to Israel during the conflict with Iran. In August 2025, a Saudi official said, US abandoned us and redirected its air defense to protect Israel. A Saudi official, publicly, saying America abandoned them. And yet Washington did not reverse course, did not apologize, did not recalibrate, because the calculus in Washington is clear. If you have to choose between protecting the node that controls the network and protecting the node that supplies the commodity, you protect the network every single time. The conflict was not forced upon Washington by an imminent Iranian attack on American territory. Iran does not possess strategic weapons capable of threatening the US itself. Its nuclear program had previously been constrained under the 2015 agreement between Iran and world powers. Iran accepted those restrictions until the US withdrew from the deal during Trump's first administration. So why the war? Why the escalation that has now seen the Strait of Hormuz partially closed, global energy markets in crisis, and Gulf states getting struck by Iranian missiles meant partly as a message to Washington? It emerged from a convergence of Israeli strategic calculations and a receptive American administration. The result is an unprecedented overlap between American and Israeli military action. For decades, Israel's wars were formally its own, with the US providing weapons, intelligence, and diplomatic backing. Today, that distinction has blurred dramatically. That blurring is not an accident. It is the culmination of decades of strategic integration so deep that at this point, American and Israeli interests have become operationally indistinguishable in the Gulf theater. And what does this mean for the global energy order? Because here is the part that should genuinely alarm every American who fills up their gas tank, every retiree whose savings are tied to market stability, every working family watching inflation eat their paycheck. Around 110 billion cubic meters per year of net LNG exports that travel through the Strait of Hormuz, representing 19% of global LNG trade in 2025, have been disrupted since February 28, 2026. 19% of global LNG trade. And meanwhile, who is positioned to benefit from exactly this kind of disruption? Russia, which has continued supplying China with oil and gas through overland pipelines immune to Persian Gulf chaos. And the United States itself, which becomes an ideal alternative supplier of oil and gas when the energy supply chain in the Middle East is disrupted, especially in the context of Europe trying to escape its dependence on Russian energy. Read that again. When the Gulf is in chaos, American energy exports gain value. The crisis is not purely a bug in the American strategic system. In some dimensions, it functions like a feature. This is what realpolitik looks like when you strip away the humanitarian language and the democracy rhetoric. It looks like a nation that will pull missile defense systems from an allied kingdom's skies and redirect them to a smaller ally because the smaller ally is more strategically valuable. It looks like a superpower that will accept the disruption of global energy markets because that disruption strengthens its own energy export position and weakens its rivals. It looks like a country that has spent decades building a regional architecture in which Israel functions as the indispensable fulcrum, the point around which military capability, intelligence networks, technology partnerships, and energy corridor security all rotate. The Gulf states are facing a highly delicate strategic choice: to become part of an escalation whose trajectory they cannot control, or to manage the threat with a strategic composure that prevents the conflict from spreading. Deterrence is imperative, but being drawn into an uncalculated entrapment is a highly costly policy. The Gulf monarchies built their entire security architecture on a simple bargain: invest enormous wealth into the American economy, host American bases, pump American-priced oil in exchange for protection and stability. That bargain is now openly under strain. And the strain is revealing something that Gulf leaders have quietly known for years but could never say in public. In Washington's hierarchy of strategic priorities, Israel's position comes before their oil, not because of AIPAC, not because of Jewish votes, not because of shared Judeo-Christian values, though all of those factors play a role at the margins, but because at the core of the US-Israel strategic partnership lies a cold, calculated understanding. Israel serves as a crucial pillar of American foreign policy in the Middle East, not only as a democratic ally, but as a forward operating partner in a region where direct US military involvement has grown increasingly unpopular. Washington does not want to station hundreds of thousands of troops across the Middle East indefinitely. The lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan burned that option to the ground. What Washington wants is a permanent, capable, locally embedded ally that can project American power without American boots. an ally sophisticated enough to conduct cyber operations, precision strikes, intelligence collection, and military deterrence simultaneously in real time across the entire region. No oil field does that. No mineral reserve does that. Only Israel does that. The 2025 U.S. National Security Strategy explicitly maintains Israeli security as a core American interest. However, it fundamentally redefines the terms of engagement, from aid paradigms to investment, emphasizing technological partnerships, joint ventures in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, and integration into regional economic networks. The relationship is not charity. It was never charity. It is a cold-blooded investment in the most militarily productive, technologically sophisticated, intelligence-dense state actor in the Middle East. And as the world moves deeper into the age of artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, satellite surveillance, and precision munitions, as the decisive factors in geopolitical power shift from how much oil you can pump to how sophisticated your signals intelligence is, Israel's value to Washington is not declining. It is accelerating. The Gulf states understand this. Mohammed bin Salman understands this. The UAE's leadership understands this, which is why, despite the publicly stated anger over abandoned air defense systems and an unsolicited war at their doorstep, the logic of forming a US-backed multinational rapid response force between Israel and the Gulf states has not only endured, it has been tested repeatedly in crisis after crisis. Because the Gulf states, for all their frustration with Washington's Israel-first calculus, have nowhere else to go that offers the same combination of military capability, technological sophistication, and global financial integration. China can offer investment, Russia can offer arms, but neither can offer the full spectrum security architecture that the US-Israel axis provides, imperfect and self-serving as it is. This is the world as it actually works, not the world of UN speeches and diplomatic pleasantries and American presidents talking about democracy and freedom. The real world, where THAAD batteries get moved across national borders in the dark, where trillion-dollar investment pledges don't buy you air defense coverage, where oil, the resource that defined the 20th century's entire geopolitical order, is now secondary to the position, the capability, and the irreplaceable strategic function of a small nation on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean. America doesn't just support Israel because of history or religion or domestic politics, though all of those threads are woven in. America prioritizes Israel's position in the Gulf above oil and natural minerals because in the architecture of 21st century power, Israel is not a client state. Israel is infrastructure.